One Piece Odyssey is the third installment in the Odyssey franchise, and honestly, I have no idea where they intend to go next with this one. The shift from developer to developer, and then from art style to art style, has been kind of strange, and the overarching story doesn't really make any sense. But I guess we'll have to see where it goes from here. All jokes aside, you might be asking this question, which is, why would you play an anime licensed game from an IP you know nothing about? And that's really good. That's a really good question that I'm not going to answer, because I don't have a good answer for that. I'm not going to be heavily critiquing the story or anything in this review. Considering my lack of knowledge of the franchise, I feel like it'd be pretty disingenuous with criticisms of the story when I kind of really know nothing about the storytelling of One Piece overall. So most of my critiques are going to be gameplay focused, because I do have several things to say about the gameplay and the game itself. However, I'm not going to give the narrative a full free pass. I'm going to talk about it a little bit, just not at length. So this game sports your basic turn-based mechanics. You have the classic rock, paper, scissors combat, where each character has a specific element tied to them. In this game, they are power, speed, and technique. Power beats speed, speed beats technique, and technique beats power. There are some elemental type advantages as well, but they're more of a side focus than the main focus. For that matter, this is a pretty basic system. Where it gets interesting is the fact that the game splits you and the enemies into areas. Most of the time you can only hit enemies in your area, and moving to other areas isn't possible until you've wiped out those enemies in your area. But there are certain moves and characters who can hit enemies in other areas as well. This makes positioning your team kind of important, and gives the game some extra depth. It's certainly unique, and at least decently fun. But this game can be kind of hit or miss when it comes to the bosses. I feel like for the most part, the bosses kind of play by their own rules. Most of them are laughably easy, but there are maybe one or two that did force me to actually tune my comp and equipment accordingly. And that difficulty is another thing. While I'm someone who doesn't mind easy games, I know the lack of a difficulty option is going to drag down this game a lot for a lot of people. It's a pretty easy game, and there are only a few hard moments, but most of the game is a cakewalk without much grinding or thought behind it. Some battles also sport special missions that can give you EXP bonuses. And while there was some variety in it, I felt like the main problem is that, especially for major bosses, they often ask you to defeat them using Luffy, and that made me pretty much employ my strategy of making Luffy my hard carry, bashing enemies with AoE moves, even if it meant they were resistant to his attacks. So yeah, it's a pretty unique battle system that offers some variety and interesting gameplay elements, but it's not totally that difficult. In fact, I'd go as far to say that almost 95% of the game is no challenge at all. This is a pretty good looking game, and I'd expect nothing less from such a huge franchise. Especially for an anime licensed game, the visuals are pretty good, and after the train wreck that was Jump Force, what the fuck is that? I'm glad this game got a solid visual style that actually fits and feels like care went into it. With all these nice visuals, I think something to note is that the game is linear. It's not meant to be a big open world adventure, and honestly that's okay. For the most part, you move pretty slowly. There's not much flash or flare to movement, and I wouldn't want to traverse an open world at this speed. I do wish the game offered some extra oomph to your speed, because this game spends a lot of time backtracking. There are moments where the game goes, oh, go here, and you go there and then it says, go back the way you came, there's something else you need to talk to this person for, and you could have completely omitted this part just by having us talk to the person and getting some extra clarification first. This wouldn't be a huge complaint if the fast travel system actually worked properly. You get it around chapter 2, and I can count on my fingers the number of times I was actually allowed to use it when I needed it. And this is where my major complaint about this game comes in. I'm not talking about the story here. I'm actually talking about the gameplay pacing. In almost any modern video game, when there are supposed to be two cutscenes played back to back, they play in succession. When you interact with objects, the game doesn't always fade to black unless it's an absolute necessity that it does. One Piece Odyssey is plagued with this kind of stuff. If you interact with certain objects, the game will fade to black, you'll get two text boxes, fade to black again, and then you'll regain control. This is such a minor thing, but it really breaks the flow of the game. On top of that, there are moments in this game where you'll watch a cutscene, take 2 steps, and then BAM! Another cutscene. And you just have to ask why? Why couldn't they just play these scenes back to back instead of having me walk 2 steps? There was no reason for that to be there. So the pacing in this game kind of just breaks the flow of gameplay all the time. There are just too many unnecessary fade transitions everywhere, and the backtracking mostly could just be avoided. While I'm not a One Piece fan, as I've never read the manga or watched the anime, I think I could appreciate what the story is trying to go for here. It's kind of a light, low-risk story, kind of like an OVA or a movie. It has no impact on the canon of the series, and for something like this, I think that's okay. That said, I'm curious if me not being into One Piece is actually what made me enjoy this a little bit more. If my favorite IP was getting a video game adaptation, I would kind of like there to be a bit more to the plot than was here. But the reverse could also be true, where you enjoy this a lot more because you have all the context and understanding of the emotions that the characters have in a lot of these scenes. Though I think the game does a pretty decent job at keeping me up to speed on the events I need to know about. This might be more of a me thing, but I don't feel like I always need to know all the context to get into a story and really feel what's going on. Sometimes without the context, I can still kind of get what's going on and enjoy it for what it is. Anyways, once I embraced the vision of this being a harmless side story OVA type thing, I think I started to enjoy the game more, even if I'm not too big of a fan of how the story goes in the last act. Die. Oh my god. Before this game came out, I saw a lot of media outlets giving this game like 8 or 9, and I kind of don't really think that works out for me. It might for you if you really enjoyed this game, but I couldn't tell you if you'd enjoy it more or less if you knew the source material. But that said, I do think it's still a solid game. It's not phenomenal, as 8 or 9s usually tend to imply. It's got a lot of issues and a lot of things that just make the game feel a little bit antiquated. But it's not a bad game either. I had my fun with it, and it certainly sets a new bar for anime-licensed video games. You guys should really make more of these, and maybe less of these things. And if you have played the game, how about you let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. I'm interested in what people who have knowledge of the IP and are One Piece fans think about this game as a whole, especially on whether you enjoyed the story. As always, leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and subscribe for more things JRPG related. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.